I'm Kate, I'm a watercolor artist, and today I'm going to share with you 5 ways that you can transfer your design onto watercolor paper. Hey there, I'm Kate, I'm a watercolor artist, and welcome to my channel. Together we're going to break down watercolor concepts so you can feel empowered to dive into the world of watercolor and make a splash. Let's do it! So let's say you have a sketch, and you need to get this design from your piece of paper onto your watercolor paper. If you have a photo reference, this can work too. You're gonna just wanna print it out on printer paper. If you use a thinner piece of paper, it's gonna be a lot easier to get the design onto your watercolor paper. Okay, first things first, your paper. I'm gonna be using Arch's 140-pound cold press paper. If you're using a paper that is thicker than 140 pounds, it is maybe gonna be a little bit harder to use some of these different types of tracing techniques. So keep that in mind. You also want to note if your watercolor paper is on a pad, so is the sheet loose. Here's an example of what a pad looks like. This is black paper, but you get the idea. It's only attached on the one edge. Or is it on a block like this, where the edges are bound together? This helps with warping, but can make it a little bit tricky to transfer your design onto the watercolor paper. Since I already have my block right here, first I'm going to show you how to transfer onto a block if that is your only option. You would want to do this if you were going to be doing a lot of wet on your paper and for some reason you couldn't tape it down with washi tape or painter's tape. Often I find for my house portraits, it's easier for me if it's a loose sheet of paper, but you never know what the occasion might warrant. Okay, so for this you're gonna need to have some carbon transfer paper or graphite transfer paper. They make some that are a blue color, but I actually prefer to use a pencil color just because I think sometimes the blue can leave some residue and be a little bit distracting. This here is a sheet of graphite transfer paper. I like the graphite because I think it's a little bit less intense than the carbon ones, and this is kind of like in those old receipt books where you would have the piece of paper underneath and then you would write on top of it and it would leave a layer on the paper below for a receipt. If that doesn't ring a bell, that just means you are not old like me, and that's totally fine. Let's get into it. Here we have our Arches paper that is on the block. We are going to put our carbon paper with the dark side facing down. And then on top of this, we are going to place our design. You're going to want to make sure that this is centered so that it is exactly where you want it to be on your watercolor paper. So I think I want it right here. And I would recommend getting a little bit of tape just to keep everything in place. Let me show you how I'm going to do that. Okay, so here I have a little bit of washi tape, and I'm just going to grab a bit of it, and I'm going to make sure I'm getting both the paper, the carbon paper, and onto my block. And I'll grab another piece of tape, and I'm gonna grab the bottom, the carbon paper, and then fold it over onto the other side of my block. Now, you can either take a mechanical pencil and push the lead all the way down, or you can actually take a pen, and this can be helpful when tracing over because then you can know when you've already traced over the part. So let's go ahead and fast forward this. The sharper the point of your tip is, the darker the line is going to be and more precise. So let's go ahead and take a look. I didn't do the whole thing because, you know, who needs to see that? But as you can see, we've got a really nice little outline. It's a little bit thicker than what I usually prefer, but it will definitely do. Might help if I turned a little light on. So the thing that I like about the graphite paper is actually you can take a kneaded eraser and then you can just dab it, or you can roll it over those lines, and that's going to help lighten it. Again, I wish this was a little bit thinner because I used a mechanical pencil. I probably would have usually used like a pen that has a really fine point, but for this purpose, it's totally fine. So you're going to want to make sure that you've dabbed up as much as you're able to of the graphite, because once you paint over the pencil lines with watercolor, it is going to stay there. You're not going to be able to erase it and get it away. So make sure it is in the form that you want it before you put the paint on. So you'll just go over this, dab, 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 dab. The next method that I'm going to share with you is my preferred method because I feel like I can get the most control out of how much pencil is left behind, how much pressure, how thick the lines are, etc. Let's get into it. First, you're going to want a loose leaf of paper. I recommend 140 pounds, but this will work if you have 300-pound paper. I will say that this is going to be hard to do if you have 300-pound paper, but it is not doable. So for this, you're gonna need a light box or some sunshine. These are two different ways. If you have sunshine, great. I do not have sunshine right now, but I'm gonna pretend that I do so that I can show you what's happening. Let's imagine that this right here is my window. So if here's your watercolor paper, you're gonna take your design and put it behind that watercolor paper. So this is facing forward, this is facing forward. Then when you turn it around, you've got the back side of both papers, and then you're gonna take your washi tape and just secure that so that your design is in the middle. Okay, so one way to check is you can hold it up to a light and you'll be able to see where your design is. Here, let me see if I can replicate that in the dark. All right, here I've got my fancy light. Imagine it's sunlight. Imagine this is our clear window, and here is our design. So you can see the outline through that sunshine, right? And you're just gonna put a little piece of tape along the top, and then you're gonna trace your design. Okay, the third way is pretty similar. The setup is all the same. I'm actually gonna use the exact same papers that I prepped in the previous section. So I've got the front of my watercolor paper. I have my design directly behind my watercolor paper. I've taped the back so it's gonna stay where I want it to stay, and then I'm gonna grab my light board. If you're like, Kate, what is a light board? This is a light board. Okay, are you ready? I'm gonna turn the light on. Okay, so this brings off light. Then when I place the reference photo over it, it is going to illuminate through the back as if we're outside looking at the window situation. But this is a little bit easier because then you don't have to hold your arm up. You can be at your desk. The one tricky thing is you'll want to have a dark space to do this, so nighttime is perfect. If you are using a thicker paper, like a 300 pound, the darker that you can get your surroundings, the better. So we have our light board, we have our reference photo next. We've got some washi tape on the edges to secure it, and then we make sure that everything is centered. So I'm gonna turn this light on and we'll check to make sure our design is centered. It is not, so let's see if I can tweak that before I solidify the tape. I think that is as good as we're gonna get. Now, I like to use a mechanical pencil because the tip is a little bit smaller than a regular drawing pencil, and I'm just gonna go through and do all of these lines. Okay, so I'm not gonna do the whole thing, but as you can see, these lines are a lot thinner than the other one that we did. Let me grab that. Here's the other one. I've even tried to erase this a lot, and that is as much as it was gonna go away. Here we have much thinner lines. These are gonna be a lot easier to pick up with the kneaded eraser. And then we have just a hint, just a whisper of those lines. So the last example, I don't wanna make a huge mess, so I'm just gonna do a tiny little example, but what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your pencil and you're gonna rub it on the back of your design. So if this was our design, here's the front. We're gonna rub a pencil all over the back, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. This is gonna get kind of messy, so don't wear your favorite white sweater, but it's probably gonna go faster with a non-mechanical pencil, but this is what I have on hand. And this is basically mimicking the same technique that we used with the first example with that transfer paper. Just in this case, we are making our own with our pencil. I've even heard of people taking their sheets and just making a sheet like this and using it in between like a piece of carbon paper. Some people even prefer it because, again, it's easier to erase than the carbon transfer paper or the graphite transfer paper. So here we have this. Here is our scrap piece of watercolor paper. Here I'm putting my design down, and let's say we want to transfer a cute little heart. Whoops. Oh my goodness. So we're gonna just trace over the line with our pencil. There we go. You can use a pen, it doesn't really matter, but we're gonna trace over our outline, and then below, voila, we have our transferred design. Do note that this does create a lot of side residue. This is all just kind of finger marks and everything from what we were doing here. So just keep that in mind. This is easily erasable with the kneaded eraser, but it does get a little bit messy. So if you don't mind if the line is there, like if the line work is part of your art, you can actually just print your watercolor paper and use an inkjet printer and then print your designs. This is from one of our watercolor kits, and we print our designs out in-house on Arch's watercolor paper. And this way you have the crisp, clear designs and it's not gonna bleed. You may wanna make sure that you're using like your good ink for your printer, no off-brand stuff. And the trickiest thing with this is that some printers may require to have a flat bed feeder because this paper is a little thicker than our usual paper, but it should work with whatever heavy cardstock setting you have. I would love to hear from you. Do you have any ideas of other ways to transfer your designs onto your watercolor paper? Is there a way that you tried and you prefer is the best way? I'd love to hear it, so definitely let me know in the comments. If this video was helpful, definitely hit the like and subscribe button. That way you're gonna be notified every time we come out with a new video. Any tips and tricks that you wanna hear, go ahead and leave it in the comments and I'll try to add it to my video queue. Happy painting, friends!